Thank you, Seth. I want to add my thank you to already what was in the announcement about our daughter-in-law, Dorothy Coons. She is home and doing better, as was announced, but she's still not out of the woods. She needs a lot of recovery time, and one of the problems is she's very small. She's always been real thin, and she lost quite a bit of weight, and so keep that in your prayers, that she could regain her weight back. I'm sorry that many of you might be disappointed since you were expecting our Pastor Ryan Hall, and I was going to say this is the new and improved version, but I guess I won't say that. At any rate, I don't do very well in the dark, so this morning I got out of bed and it was dark, and I fumbled and stumbled and bumbled my way to the wall, pushed up this little knob, and voila, the sun came up. Well, it wasn't actually the sun, but the lights came on. And I think probably most of you did the same thing if you got up in the dark. Then went downstairs, and as I went downstairs, I stepped in this little room and I turned this little knob and hot water came out. Amazing. Now, you might think, well, these things, they're normal. That's the way it always is, isn't it? And it pretty much is. Some of you, there's a few people in here maybe that experienced life without hot water, electricity, and so on. Myself included, when I was, a small child. We lived in a home that didn't have running water or indoor bathrooms or very good heat or light for that matter. But most of us have, all our life, have been in comfortable surroundings like we are here today, lights, because it's dreary out, and the lights are helpful. Without the lights, we'd have a hard time, maybe I would, maybe you wouldn't, but I would have a hard time reading my Bible because it's harder to see when it's this dark and dingy and gray out. But we've come to expect this. We have not known anything like this, but for most of history, it's not been like that. Most of the, going way back, people didn't have electricity. People didn't have running hot water. People didn't have those kind of things, but we have. And we get used to it. I'm guessing that many of you, I have, gone to the grocery store in the last month, and I'm guessing most of you have as well. And as expected, the shelves were full. There was lots of food. And I'm guessing the same way for you, whether you were going to the grocery store, going car shopping, or going shopping for clothes, or to the gas station, the convenience store to get your coffee, or whatever it was, you probably found what you were looking for when you went. Now, except for the years of COVID from 2020 to 2022, that has been, for the most part, the case. During that time, the supply chain got interrupted quite a bit, and there were some empty spots on the shelves. We still had plenty of food. We just didn't have, or other things too, but we just might not have had everything we wanted. But it did make us a little bit nervous, because it can happen pretty quickly that is not the case. But now everything's forgotten and pretty much everything is back to normal. Even the labor pool has made it back to where most companies are now pretty well stocked with labor. It's not as easy to get a job now as it was maybe a year ago, because a year ago you could walk into almost any place and get a job, from McDonald's to any of the huge factories or a lot of offices and so forth. You could get a job pretty much anywhere you wanted to, and it wasn't much of a difficulty. But now it's back to pretty much business as usual. And we're excited about that. We're happy about that. But as I mentioned, that has not always been the case. And it could get back to what it was before. We hope not, but there's always that possibility. And this is not a sermon about becoming a prepper or anything of that nature, stocking up. I mean, everybody probably should have a little bit of preparedness, but there's no way that you can prepare for everything that could come down the pike. COVID, for example, it caught us blindside, came from the back and hit us in the back of the head without us even realizing it till it was done with. And we couldn't have done much about it anyway. Even if we had known, we couldn't have. I'm talking about John Doe. The average layperson couldn't have done a whole lot about it, even if we had known it was coming. And we tried to probably do what we could to avoid getting it, but I'm guessing a majority of us, even in here, got COVID at one point or another. And we lived to tell about it. But this is what God wants, right? He wants us to be content. He wants us to be well supplied. He wants us to have everything that we need, right? I would think so. I'm guessing so, because even Psalm 23:1 says that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Now, it doesn't mean, there's a lot of things I want, but it's not the things I need. This is talking about those things that we need. And that's true to a point, but there's another side to that as well. This one small thing in Matthew, the 6th chapter, if you'd turn there with me, please. Matthew 6, this is the largest dissertation that Jesus Christ gave on discipleship and Christian living. This in one place. See, all throughout the Bible, especially in the Gospels, of course, Christ is teaching about those kind of things. But this is the biggest sermon or presentation that he gave specifically on that. And when he was talking to his disciples to pray, trying to teach them to pray, he says, when you pray, do it in thus and such of a manner. And then it goes into what we call the Lord's Prayer. But the Lord's Prayer, it's just an outline. It's not the kind of thing that we, pray every day verbatim. Now, I know there are groups of people that will not pray without ending with the Lord's Prayer. In fact, the group that I was born into, that's what they do. Every prayer ends with the Lord's Prayer. And when they kneel down, and of course when they do long prayers, which gave us young guys a chance to take a little nap. And when we heard them go launching into the Lord's Prayer, we knew it was just about time to get up. It was the trigger that we watch for. But the Lord's Prayer is just an outline to tell us what to do. But I want to focus a little bit on verse 11. Verse 11 says, give us this day our daily bread. Now, what it doesn't say is give us always our daily bread. Give us, make sure we have everything we need. It doesn't say that. It says, give us today. This very day, which is what the word means, now. Give us now our daily bread. And I just want to remind us, this is actually more inclusive than just food and drink. This means our sustenance, or what we need to survive, our clothing, our shelter, and so on. It means more than just eating. Obviously, eating is one of the three important things. Eating, drinking, and breathing, along with, obviously, shelter is high on that list as well. And we need those things, and this includes all of that. Includes all of that. And give us this day our daily bread now is something that we should keep in mind today. Today is all we have. We're not living in tomorrow. We might look to tomorrow, but we're not living there. Yesterday, we can't do anything about that. Only the right now, here today, is all that we have, so that we have to make the most of what we have right now, today. The title of my message is, Our daily bread, if anybody keeps track of those things. Our daily bread. Now, getting back to some of the things I discussed when I started, I had a friend, and this was a man in the Church of God, a good man and a good friend. He always said, and he said it facetiously, tongue-in-cheek, because he knew the answer to this, but he said, we have warm houses. We have grocery stores full of food. We have drugstores to get anything that the grocery store might not have, and prescriptions and all the other things. We have insurance, so that if something does happen, which recently did to my car, I didn't have to pay for it because the insurance company took care of it. So we have that. We have stat cares. If we, break our toe, we can go to the stat care, and they'll tell us our toe's broken, and we'll go home and hurt. We have hospitals to take care of us if we get seriously injured. We have 401ks to take care of us, or some other form of benefits that we can tap into if we need to. And we have social programs. All these things, he said, we have. Question, why do we need God? We have all the bases covered. We have all these things. Why do we need God? Well, there are many reasons, obviously, and they're all fundamental and basic. But those are valid questions for a lot of people, and a lot of people that we see around us, our neighbors, possibly some of our friends or coworkers, and the people we run into when we're out in public, they live as if they don't need God. And I think a lot of times they wonder if and why we need God. And maybe that's why there is so much atheism or so little belief in God, because that's waning and lessening all the time. But I'm guessing the people who came here on the Mayflower did not have that attitude, didn't think that way, because it was a lot more hand to mouth for them than it is for us today. And again, we get lulled into a false sense of security. We get lulled into thinking, this will never change. It's like the sun coming up tomorrow. It'll always be there. Every time we get up in the morning, and at whatever appointed time sunrise is, there it comes. The sun comes up. This is not to frighten anybody into thinking that doomsday is coming tomorrow or today or whatever. It's to encourage us and remind us and inspire us to rely on God for our needs, to rely on God for our needs to be supplied, and to remember where these things come from. Psalm 23, verse 4, we quoted verse 1. Psalm 23, verse 4 says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." So there are things that come that are not comfortable, that are uncomfortable, things that come that we do not particularly care for. But he said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." In other words, God, I know you're with me today. I know you're with me today. There are many examples that we could go to in the Bible, and we'll go to a few of them. For example, in Genesis, the 12th chapter, Genesis 12. I've already talked so much that my mouth is dry. But Genesis 12 is talking about the patriarch Abraham. At that time, his name was Abram, but it was later changed to father of many nations, which is what it means, Abraham. And it just in the two previous verses before chapter 12, and we'll start in verse 1 of chapter 12, but in the two previous verses, Terah, Abraham's dad, and his whole family were going from Ur of the Chaldeans they were going to go to the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they dwelt there. So they were dwelling there in Haran. The next verse might give us some indication because it might have been Terah's health that wouldn't let him travel further because of, it says that he died there then in the land of Haran when he was 205 years old, which is quite a stretch, but it's not nearly what some of the other Methuselah and some of the other previous people had lived, years that some of those people had lived. But in verse 12, now they were living in Haran. The Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country." And by the way, we'll also go to Hebrews 11:8 just for a second after we get done with this. But anyway, the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country and from your family and your father's house to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And we, as it says here, I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and will curse him who curses you. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed because of Abraham and his faithfulness." And that's one of the reasons we have plenty of electricity, plenty of food, and we have the choicest things in the whole world here in this country. It's part of the reason we still have that, because of the blessings that were promised to Abraham. But what did Abraham do? He said, "Nah, you know what? My family's here. I like it here. The weather's better here, or it's good here." He didn't know where he was going, so I think I'll just stay here. Well, verse 4 doesn't say that. It says, "So Abram departed." God said, "Go." Abraham said, "Go." Or Abraham got up and went. And he went, he departed as the Lord had spoken, and he parted from Haran, and they did not know where he was going. And he was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Now, I'll say this. I'm not 75 yet, but I'm pushing at it. And I know for sure that I wouldn't want to pack up any of my stuff and get on the road and head out and go somewhere where I didn't even know where I was going. Wouldn't know when I got there whether I was there because I didn't know where I was supposed to be. I know that, although Abraham, to be fair, lived another 100 years after this, so I'm sure it wasn't quite the trauma that it would be for me or you to have to do that when you get to be 75 like Abraham was. But just to add a little bit to it, we see why these blessings are here. In verse 8 of chapter 11 of Hebrews, it says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going." He went there and didn't even know where he was going because, as I said, he wouldn't even have known he was there unless God had told him, "Here's where I want you to be." But he did. And it was by faith. And again, that's why we have so many of these blessings. Give us this day. Abraham took one step in front of the other, day by day by day. He journeyed to where he was going. Give us this day, today, give us our daily bread. Give us what we need, Father, today. Let's go back to the 6th chapter of Matthew, and we'll finish part of that thought in the 6th chapter of Matthew, in verse 34. It's just a little further on down. It says, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things." The King James says, "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." Here it says, which says the same thing, but I think the King James is a little more poetic or fluid. It says here, "Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will come And whatever happens tomorrow, we'll deal with that tomorrow. All we have is today. Put all our energy in making sure that we do things right today. Now, to be clear, it's not to say that, in the summer, if we're a farmer, we shouldn't put hay in our barn for the cattle in winter, or that we shouldn't dig the potatoes that we grew in our garden so we have something to eat in the winter. It doesn't mean that at all. It says don't be anxious about it or don't worry about it. Take care of today. There were a lot of things leading up to this from about verse 26 on to verse 34 that we could worry about. It says, look, the birds. Our Father feeds them and they don't do anything like that. Or why worry about clothing? We'll have clothing. We'll get clothing. If we need clothing tomorrow, we'll go tomorrow and get clothing. Or if we need it today, obviously we'll go today and get clothing. Because he said, consider the lilies. They don't do anything, and look at them. Or don't worry saying, what shall we eat? Because God will provide. Again, he expects our help. Yes, he does. He expects us to do what we can. But we shouldn't be anxious about tomorrow. We shouldn't over worry about what's going to take place tomorrow. It's all about developing trust and faith in God. That's what it's for. Even though we all got up this morning and unless the storm, which could have happened because it's windy and a lot of limbs came down, and I know the energy company sent me a notice that be prepared just in case the power might go off, because these storms tend to blow down tree limbs, and they try to cut them back so they don't impact us in these kind of conditions. But in spite of all their efforts, it still happens, and that could have happened. But unless that happened, you probably had heat, light, and electricity and hot water in your home this morning when you got up. So we didn't have to worry about that. Our life is lived one day at a time, one step at a time. Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with to some extent, their motto or their creed is one day at a time, one step at a time. Because that's all we have. That's all we can deal with. We can't do things today that haven't come up till tomorrow. So worry about today. What they're saying, it's like, and I think I told this story before, if I come into my room, and my wife will verify this, if I want to think I need to do my desk and clean it all, I just should start with that top layer. I can't do it all at one time because it's too much. If I think about doing it all today, I'll never get started because it's just too much. I won't do it. But if I do what I can today, eventually it'll be taken care of. There are other stories in the Bible besides Abraham that a couple of them that I'm going to look at. One of them is in 1 Kings 17. 1 Kings 17, and it's 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, and then Chronicles. So Kings is right in between 1 and 2 Chronicles. Well, 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Chronicles. Excuse me. The northern 10 tribes of Israel had, from their start, they had Jeroboam as their king when they split away from the southern tribes in Judah and Jerusalem. And it just seemed like every king got worse than the last one. They never had a real good king. Every king got worse and worse and worse. And here in, the last couple of verses of chapter 16, we come up to Ahab. And it says in verse 33 of chapter 16, Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. He was a terrible king. and there were other terrible kings after him. But he was worse than all the ones that came before him, and they were really bad. It got to the point where God just couldn't let it go on any longer, so a man burst on the scene like a bolt of lightning, and his name was Elijah. And here's our introduction to Elijah. Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead. That's the introduction. We don't know huge amounts about Elijah. I mean, there's other information about him here and there, but it's not like David, who they went out and got David as a shepherd boy and so on, where we have a progression. He bursts on the scene fully formed. But he said to Ahab, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand," this is in chapter 17, verse 1, "there shall not be dew nor rain these years except by my word." And that was 3.5 years. I've never been, and none of us have been at a time when there was no dew or rain for 3.5 years. I don't even know how they could have managed to keep their livestock alive, to keep even themselves alive without water for that long. One morning I went out. It's not just that they didn't have rain, they didn't have dew either. And dew provides a lot of moisture. I went out and my car was totally drenched in dew, covered in dew. So I took a rag to wipe it off, to wipe the windshield and other parts of my car off, and I wrung it out, and there's a lot of water, a lot of moisture and dew. But they didn't even have that. And he said, "That's not going to happen until I say it will. You're not getting rain." Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Get away from here and turn eastward and hide by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan." Now this was just a little stream that was flowing into the Jordan River. "And it will be that you shall drink from the brook, and I've commanded the ravens to feed you there." And I've thought about that. I'm not sure I'd want ravens to feed me, because I know what ravens eat, and it isn't particularly pleasant or appetizing. It might be roadkill that you get. But that's not what God sent him, though, by the ravens. But it wouldn't be one of the things that would engender confidence in what you're getting. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord, for he went and stayed by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordans, and the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So he was well taken care of, one day at a time. Every day the ravens brought food. But when evening came and they brought food, how did he know that they were going to do it again tomorrow? Maybe he was going to have to go hungry. He would have had to have faith for that to happen, to continue to be fed day by day. Well, that's one thing, but then here's another thing that happened to him. Now, it happened after, this is in verse 7, after a while that the brook dried up because of no rain. That was a small stream, and after a while there was just no water running through it anymore because there had been no rain in the land. And the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Rise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there." Sidon's up on the Mediterranean, northwest of Jerusalem. And I'm guessing Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, would have been close to the Mediterranean as well. "Go up there and dwell there, because I have commanded a widow there to provide for you." So he does that. He gets up there, and as he gets there, he sees this widow. She's out gathering sticks. And he said, "Give me a drink." And she said, and as she was going to get the drink, she turned around and yelled after her, he said, "And bring me some bread to eat." But she told him, she said, "As the Lord lives, I have not got bread. All I have in a barrel is a handful of flour. A handful of flour and a little bit of oil in a jar. That's all I have. I was gathering these sticks. I was going to go and, I was going to go, and I was going to take that flour and bake myself a cake for myself and my son, and then that's it, we were going to die. We were going to starve to death after that, because that's all we have and have no way of getting any more. So Elijah said to her, in verse 13, "Don't fear, go and do as you have said, but make me a small cake first, and bring it to me, and afterward make some for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth." Wow. Now I know that Jesus Christ fed 4,000 and 5,000 people with a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread, and that was possible. He fed all of those. But here, this lady had a barrel. It had a handful of flour and a little bit of oil, enough oil to make a cake, and that was it. So how in the world is this going to happen that she can feed 3 people for, she didn't know how long the rain drought was going to last, but till it ends. How was she going to be able to do that? Because why go back tomorrow to look into the barrel? Because we took the last handful of it out today. But give us our daily bread. She went back the next day, and lo and behold, there was flour. And there was oil. And the third day she went back, looked in the barrel. There was flour and there was oil. And that continued for how long, who knows. It might have been for a year and a half, 2.5 years, or even longer than that this continued day by day by day. She had the faith, Elijah had the faith to go back to the flour barrel, scoop out another bunch of flour, make some more bread, go to the oil jar. Lo and behold, there was oil, poured it in a pan, and they made bread. They were able to do that until the rain picked up again. In verse 15, she went away and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and her house her household ate for many days. Verse 16, the bin of flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. Faith, it took faith. And every day their faith got stronger, because every day our daily bread was provided. They had bread, they had oil, and they had water. So they could eat and they could be sustained every day, day after day after day after day. They had the faith that would happen. Jesus Christ even referred to this story. We won't go there, but it's in Luke, the 4th chapter. He references this story. Faith in God saved Elijah and the widow, because they got their daily bread day by day by day. Now it's one thing to feed one person for a lengthy period of time, or maybe even 2 or 3 people. But what would happen if we had thousands of people, maybe millions of people to feed? How would we do that? Well, that happened when the children of Israel came out of Egypt. There were perhaps 2 to 3 million people that had to be fed. That kind of distribution of food, even if you have the food, is difficult, let alone have enough food to do that. But it happened. Let's just go there. Exodus, the 16th chapter. Exodus 16. I'm thinking that we would be the people in verse 2. The whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron because there was no food. They said, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. I guess the Red Sea wasn't enough to convince them that God was going to take care of them. But I know when I get hungry, I get cranky. On the Day of Atonement, I can get pretty cranky sometimes. And I'm guessing that I might have been part of those people in verses 2 and verse 3. I'm thinking, how in the world are we going to get out of this? We're out here in the wilderness. We can't go back. And what are we going to do? We need food. We got to have something to eat. We need water. We need to be sustained. God had a plan. God was able to take care of it. He knew. But how would you do that and get it to all those people? Well, God beat Amazon to the punch. He delivered the food right to their door long before Amazon came along. Maybe now we try to call Amazon, see if they can deliver some macaroni for us or something, and we could eat. But God delivered it right to their doorstep. He told them what He was going to do. In verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day." Here's why, a certain quota every day. Again, it's day by day, one day at a time, "that I may test them." This was a test for them. This was to see if they would be faithful, to see if they could follow instructions, see if they could do what they were told. Whether they will walk in my law or not, whether they will do as I say. And He said, "I will a certain quota every day, and it shall be on the sixth day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." Enough for each person every day, but just enough, and the rest of it is to be disposed of. Those who, it said in one place here, those who gathered a lot had just enough, and those who gathered a little had just enough. So it just was enough for each person every day. And here in verse 15 it tells us what it is. And that is exactly what it called it, what it is, or what is it? Manna, and that's what manna means. What is it? Manna is how God took care of them. Verse 16 to verse 19 has the gathering instructions again a little more explicitly with what happened when the orders were not followed. Verse 16, "Let every man gather according to each one's need, an omer per person." So if you had 5 people in your tent, you collected 5 omers. And they measured it by omers, and he who gathered much had nothing left over, and so on. But, he said, here's the test, "let no one leave of it till morning." But what did they do? Notwithstanding, they didn't believe. They thought, well, here, we'll just gather and make sure we have plenty for tomorrow. They did not heed Moses, it says in verse 20. Some of them left part of it until morning, and it bred worms, and it caused a big stink. The whole camp smelled like rotten something or other. The whole camp, there was a stench hovering over the whole camp, and of course Moses was very angry with them. And then they changed it. Now we come to the other test of it. It was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses, "This is what the Lord said, tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath, bake what you will today." And I think there's a lesson for us in here. Bake what you will today because tomorrow is a Sabbath. Perhaps we should pay some attention to that. "And boil what you'll boil, lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning." So they did that, and they gathered at 6 days. Now it happened that some of the people Again, the test was there, but some of the people, again, didn't believe him. They went out on the seventh day to gather, but there was none. I look outside and there's snow on the ground, and I guess that's what the manna was like. It was a little scattering of manna on it, but on the seventh day, on the Sabbath, there was none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws?" Non-believers. And we can fall into that trap too. We can think that everything's forever going to go along at the same rate. But what we need to do is live our life day to day and depend on God day to day. It's what builds faith. It's how we get stronger. Those who believed were fed, while those who didn't went hungry on the Sabbath day. Again, give us this day our daily bread. I know that stories in the Bible, and they're for our instruction, and if we take them to heart, they impart a lot of instruction and a lot of wisdom to us about God, about who He is, how He works, about the mind of God, and we can read them, and the more we take them to heart, the better off we are if we practice them. But a lot of these stories, because they were so long ago and they're just out of a book, are hard to relate to. And we all know that. But I want to give you, as the last story, a little story that's a little bit easier to relate to and a little bit easier for us to realize that it actually happened. And that's a story about a widow and her 11 children. It was during the Great Depression the Depression, I guess, lasted from about 1929 to when the Second World War began, but it was mostly during the 30s. And most of this is related in a small book that it's not a book you'll find on any bestsellers lists or any lists. You can't get it on Amazon or so on. I think it's out of print now. It's called Hills and Valleys. It was written by this lady's daughter-in-law. She related this story. And this family, technically she was not a widow for the whole period of time, but she might as well have been, and maybe it was even worse than being a widow because her husband was in a TB sanitarium in Logansport, Indiana. And he was incarcerated, I think, about once a year for a week or two. They let him come home, but that was about it. And these people nearly starved. They lived in a rundown, ramshackle house in the woods that shouldn't even have been lived in, but that's all they had, so they did. And she had 11 children to feed, no job. And of course, during the Depression, a lot of people didn't have work. Food was scarce. It was hard to come by. Her neighbors didn't have work, of course, or it much better than she did, some of them. But there were no social programs at that time to take care of those kind of people. Most of the time, if they wanted to eat, the boys had to go out and maybe try to catch a couple of rabbits or a squirrel or something. Oftentimes, all they had was fat sandwiches. That's all they had to eat. They did try to go to school as much as they could, but they had, in the wintertime, sometimes one or two of them could go to school and wear the coats that they had, and then the next day maybe one or two of the others went to school wearing the coats because they didn't have clothes. They didn't have a lot. Didn't have decent shoes. They had nothing. If they were lucky, maybe sometimes somebody would bring them some potatoes or something. But again, they had nothing. So one evening, her oldest son saw his mom sitting on the rocking chair, and her mouth was moving, but he couldn't hear her saying anything. And he realized that she was praying. And from that day on, he started to pray as well. And when he started to pray, he and his mom both praying every day, things seemed to start getting better. They were able to catch a few more rabbits and a few more squirrels, and people seemed to bring, day by day, they brought more food, more potatoes. Seemed like the wood stove burned a little hotter and kept the house a little bit warmer. And things got better day by day as they went along. Now, sometime during this period of time, their dad died. So he was not even coming home anymore at any point. But he realized that prayer makes a difference. Every day they prayed, and every day they lived today, one day at a time. They started to have faith. Their faith started to grow because they realized that God was taking care of them. God was taking care of them. God responds to those who depend on Him, who trust in Him to take care of them, as we saw in Matthew 6:34. So, to get this concluded, Elijah, who wants to be fed by ravens? I'm not particularly looking forward to it, but I guess it's better than not having any food at all. Let me point that out. Who has the faith, or who would have the faith, to go to an empty flour barrel every day, look in there, and expect something to be in there after we cleaned it out yesterday? The widow from Zarephath did, and Elijah did, because they depended and trusted on God day by day, one day at a time. They trusted on God to take care of them. How would we respond to manna? We might be the people who keep it overnight and keep it till the next day, and maybe the stench was coming from our tent, our house. Or maybe on the Sabbath, we might go out expecting something that's not there, that didn't happen. That's what we want to avoid. We want to build our faith. We can't allow ourselves to be lulled into sleep to think that this just automatically happens, all these things, because that's not the way it works. God takes care of His people. Now, my grandmother, who was the widow in this story I just told you, and my father was the oldest son, they nearly starved. But when they started praying, things started to get better. And my dad told me some of those stories on many occasions of how things happened, how things got better day by day, and how he learned to trust in God. He was 49 years old and an Amish farmer, and he changed, and he started coming to the Worldwide Church of God and keeping the Sabbath, the holy days, and so on. And it was partly because of the faith that he developed as a young child that he was willing to do that he was able to do that. In 2 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, 2 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, here's a point that it's in verse 16, a point that we want to keep in mind that solidifies what we've been talking about. It says, therefore, in verse 16, we do not lose heart even though our outward man is perishing, which it is. We get older. We get a little weaker. We get a little less mentally sharp. I don't know about you, but I do. And it takes me a little bit longer to do things. Every day the outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. Give us this day, today, our daily bread. The inward man is perishing, but we're renewed day by day. What we need to do is learn to draw closer to God. When we live day by day by day, and we depend on God for the things we need day by day by day, when we live one day at a time, we draw closer to God. Our faith gets stronger. When it gets tougher, we have the strength to endure. We have the strength to endure to the end. Give us this day our daily bread, and let us live by that.